Good. Well, thank you everyone for coming to this talk on Take Control, How to Tame Energy Costs in a Wild Energy Market. This is the second time we've done this today, and the first time we were doing it this morning, the lights kept going out because people weren't moving around enough. They had a motion sensor. So if I start doing jumping jacks on the stage, you'll know why. So thank you again, and we're supposed to pump up PM Expo. So PM Expo says thank you for attending PM Expo. And Bruce Power Direct, we have a booth at number 813 if you wanted to come by and see a demonstration of our software and pick up some really great marketing collateral and some case studies. But without further ado, we are going to get into the presentation. The first thing that our lawyers always tell us is we have to put up this mild disclaimer just to make sure that you know that you're making your own energy decisions, and we're just giving you some really good advice. Sure. All right. So is that good? All right, perfect. So getting into the presentation, we call this the wild market ride. And so what we're going to do is we're going to identify some major themes that we've seen that have taken place through 2010 to 2015 that have really impacted your energy costs and really impacted the formation of your energy costs. And then we're also going to look into the future in terms of the 2015 to 2020 to see what's coming in the future with those energy costs and what you need to do in order to manage those costs. And then ultimately, we're really going to try and give you some recommended actions that you can take away to start saving money on your energy bills. So what's happened to your energy bills? In the past 5 years, there's been a lot of changes to your energy bills. And at its highest level, what's happened in the energy industry, there's been a lot of changes in the energy industry. The first change is in Ontario. We got rid of all our coal-fired generation. So we used to have about 20% of our electricity in Ontario was generated from coal. And we've replaced that largely with a lot of natural gas generation. We got rid of the coal-fired generation primarily as an environmental initiative. So the Liberal government said we had to get rid of that because it's damaging the environment, it's hurting our lungs and our health. So we had to replace that coal-fired generation. And as well as with that coal-fired generation, we replaced it with wind turbines. And you'll see there's massive wind turbine farms everywhere. We have about 3,000 megawatts of wind farms in the province right now, and by the end of next year, we're going to have 5,000 megawatts. And to put that into a relative number for you, that wind turbine you see there is about a 2.5 megawatt wind turbine. So you can see if we're going to have 5,000 megawatts of wind, we're going to have the math. We're going to have lots and lots of wind turbines all over the province. And if you've ever been driving on the 401 or up in Bruce County, you just see wind farms everywhere. So it's pretty widespread with a lot of wind farms. Another reason why costs have gone up is we've been investing massively in infrastructure. So it's an infrastructure renewal investment. So the province didn't invest in transmission and any of those other costs for more than a decade. And so now we're trying to catch up with that investment. And so the province in general, and Hydro One specifically, is spending billions of dollars in that investment. And then as well at Bruce Power, so I should have said earlier, Bruce Power is obviously the province's largest generator. And the division that I run is Bruce Power Direct, and we call ourselves Bruce Power Direct because we deal directly with energy consumers in Ontario, helping them try and save money on their energy bills. But our mothership, Bruce Power, we're refurbishing a lot of nuclear units, which is another thing that's contributing to the costs. But we're giving that's a long-term investment that's going to pay itself off over the next 25 years. And so that's led to some frustrations in our customers, and all our customers express the same thing. And the net result of all those changes is that we've seen a 40% increase in cost over the past 5 years. And the really challenging part about this is the Ministry of Energy, because of a lot of these changes that are going on in the industry and a lot of the investments that we're just talking about, and from a refurbishment perspective, are going to be happening for the foreseeable future. The Ministry of Energy says that energy costs are going to be going up by at least 8% per year for the next 5 years. So it means that we've really got to be cognizant about how much energy we're consuming and how we're paying for that energy so that we can eliminate some of those cost increases on our bills. So not just has the energy costs gone up, the breakout of those costs has changed. So pre-2010, we lived in a world where the energy costs were made up by primarily a variable component. So that's a component that you can manage through procurement strategies, so through hedging and through buying energy and things like that. And the fixed component of your bills was relatively small. So if you think about a fixed and variable rate mortgage, we were used to have a high variable rate that was fluctuated with the interest rate, and a very, very low fixed component that was locked in. That was your base mortgage rate. And now what we see as we're moving forward into the future is we see the fixed component is becoming much more. So the fixed component of your energy bill now is about 75% of your bill, and the variable component is that remainder 25% of your energy consumption. So that means that you really need to adapt some new energy management strategies in order to manage your energy consumption and reduce your costs. Now, interestingly, for us anyways, as a bit of energy geeks, is this cost transformation that we're seeing is happening across the globe. It's not just in Ontario. So we've got an example here from 5 jurisdictions across the world, and you can see the green bars at the bottom. That's the variable cost that I was talking about previously. And you can see in all 5 of these jurisdictions across the 5 years profile here, the variable costs are relatively steady, and the fixed costs are the ones that are going up. And the best example is Germany. So if you look at Germany, the costs there, the variable costs have stayed quite low, but the fixed costs are going up and getting quite high. And the reason why that's the best example is because Ontario is following Germany's lead very closely. So in the late 2000s, Germany had a feed-in tariff program. In 2009, Ontario introduced a feed-in tariff program. And Germany relies a lot on wind and solar now for their energy supply. And just like Ontario, we rely upon a lot of wind and solar. So what we can see happening in Germany is almost looking into the crystal ball and seeing what's going to happen in the future. And those impacts are going to start happening in Ontario. And we're starting to see the thin edge of that wedge now already. So from the cost perspective, that's the nutshell summary there is costs have gone up 40%. Those cost increases have been driven primarily by the fixed costs, and the variable costs have stayed relatively stable. So now it means that you have to adopt your energy management practices with this new world reality. And part of the new world reality is this is affecting all of us, whether it's homeowners, whether it's businesses. We're not alone in this challenge of rising energy costs and changing energy markets. And like I said, the industry is changing, and it means that we all need to adapt new tools to manage our energy costs. So next thing, we're going to look at what's driving these cost increases. So we talked about what's happened to the costs in terms of they've gone up to 40% in the past 5 years, and their composition has changed to be more fixed cost components. But what's been driving those changes? So the fundamental drivers for those changes, one is CO2 restrictions and reductions in CO2 emissions. This is primarily seen through, obviously, in the past, coal-fired generation. The second thing is we've seen pretty substantial decreases in energy consumption across the province of Ontario. And again, that's contributed to the higher fixed costs. And then finally, we've introduced a lot of unpredictable renewable generation that has an impact on those costs as well, because we have to pay for that additional infrastructure. So first, looking to the coal-fired generation, what's happened to coal in Ontario? Well, we used to have this much coal in the province, so this is about 3,200 megawatts of coal. And now the average demand in Ontario is about 20,000 megawatts, and so we had this much coal. We accounted for more than 10% of our consumption and closer to 20% of our total consumption. And we were going to plan to replace it with this. So you can see it's a mix of a lot of wind, some biomass, some hydro, and some solar. And so that was the government's plan. They said, we're going to get rid of coal and we're going to replace it with all of this stuff. And what actually happened is this. So we didn't install as much wind as we thought. We didn't install as much solar as we thought. And we were left with a gap. So we closed all of that coal. We're going to replace it with all this generation. And then what we actually replaced it with was less. And we have this gap, and that gap is being filled by natural gas. Luckily for us, natural gas has been relatively cheap for the past 5 years, and so it hasn't had that much of an impact on our costs. But that's what the end result of the off-coal program and the carbon reductions that we're trying to put through the energy sector. So the next fundamental factor that's really driven the change in costs is a reduction in consumption. So here is the consumption for the entire province of Ontario. And you can see from its peak in 2005, you can see there's a big spike there in 2005. That's 157 billion kilowatt hours. And so that year we consumed as a province 157 billion kilowatt hours. And now this year, if we look at 2015, we're really close to around 140 billion kilowatt hours, or roughly a 7% decrease across the entire Ontario economy. Now, the reason why that impacts your costs is because all the fixed costs get amortized over these billions and billions of kilowatt hours. So when you look at your bill and you're paying 8 cents a kilowatt hour or 7 cents a kilowatt hour for the global adjustment or some of your other charges, it's because there's X billions of dollars across the entire Ontario that's getting amortized over all of these kilowatt hours. So that means in 2005, when there's 157 billion kilowatt hours, if the cost remained the same, your rate would be much lower because there's more kilowatt hours to spread those costs over. So as conservation takes hold and we start reducing our consumption more and more, we're going to have a bigger impact from some of those fixed costs. Now, a question that was asked this morning was like, okay, that's great. Where is all this demand? Where's this demand going? Where's this demand reduction coming from? So on I guess it's your left, you can see where this reduction in demand is coming from, and you can see the residential sector is decreasing their demand by about 2% per year. And now that's 2% per year, even when we're adding new houses. Ontario is growing, people are coming, and we're still reducing our energy consumption in the residential sector by 2% per year. So everyone's getting a little bit more efficient. And I just bought a new energy-efficient fridge, had to replace the fridge, bought a new energy-efficient fridge, and everyone's just doing those little actions, and we're seeing that those little actions are adding up. And the industrial and the manufacturing sector is the next thing that we've seen a really pretty fundamental decrease in energy supply, 1% per year for the past 10 years. So in 2008, before the financial crisis, we had about 3,000 megawatts of industrial customers in the province of Ontario. So that's the likes of Dofasco and Tembec and big steel companies and pulp and paper mills and all that kind of stuff. And that's literally fallen by half. It's fallen by 50%. And it fell by 50% in roughly 18 months, so from the period of 2009 to 2011. So a pretty fundamental shift in our economy away from manufacturing and to more of a service sector. But luckily, that's remained flat. So it's fallen that 50% and stayed there since then. The one part of the economy that's rising, and the energy consumption from that part of the economy is rising, is commercial and institutional. So buildings like this, office buildings, towers, institutional buildings like universities and schools and hospitals and things like that, their energy consumption's gone up, and it's been going up by 2.5% or 3% per year every year for the past 5 or 7 years. And the reason why that's happening, and we think that the reason why this is happening, is because it's consistent with what you see happening in the economy, right? We're switching from heavy manufacturing and a lot of machinery type consumption, and we're becoming more banking and insurance and service and high tech. And so those sectors of the economy are using more and more energy, whereas the things like manufacturing are using less. So another thing that's really happening in the world from a reducing our consumption perspective is as a globe, we're investing massive amounts of dollars in trying to really incentivize conservation. So you can see in the last bar graph there in 2013, the globe in its total is going to spend more than $45 billion trying to incentivize conservation. And this is just with formally approved conservation programs. And this doesn't include conservation programs from businesses that are going out in order to reduce their consumption for a financial benefit. This is governments investing in conservation programs kind of as a social goodwill for the good of everybody. What's really interesting about this one is if you look at the blue bar at the bottom is the U.S., and that tiny, tiny, tiny sliver right above it is Canada's contribution to this total. So you can see from a global perspective, we're barely investing in in conservation at all from a formal conservation program perspective, but we're still doing our part. So that's another thing that's impacting our fixed costs. So all these costs are getting rolled into those fixed costs that we all have to pay through our energy bills. The next thing that everyone always asks us about is renewable generation. So we've added a lot of renewable generation in the past 5 years in Ontario, or really the past 10 years. So what does that look like? Well, you can see here that we may have added considerable amounts of wind and solar and things like that, but this number is through the end of 2014, and you can see that wind provided roughly 8% of the total energy in the province of Ontario. So it's something. It's grown from 0% roughly 10 years ago to 8% now. So it's quite a good contribution. But you can see a lot of the energy in the province of Ontario, 58% of it is still being supplied from the nuclear sector. And again, these are all high fixed cost assets that we all have to pay through those fixed costs on our bills. And this one hasn't, so I'm going to talk a little bit about solar. So this one hasn't had a very big impact on the market yet, but it's a very hot topic. So everyone's always asking us, what's happening with solar? What's happening with solar? How much solar is there in the marketplace? So here's a graph of the average day in Ontario. And you can see the different colors represent different fuel sources and where our energy is coming from, which generation sources. And you can see the green bars there at the top is how much solar we're having. So it's about what you'd expect. It starts in the morning as the sun's coming up, and it hits its peak in the middle of the day, and then it falls near the end of the afternoon. And just as you'd expect, here's what Ontario's largest solar plant, our first actually utility-scale solar plant. This is the hourly production profile of that solar plant. So you can see it's exactly what you'd think. It kind of peaks in the middle of the afternoon, and then it falls, and then it's effectively zero overnight, and then it peaks to its top at noon, and then it falls overnight, and it continues to follow that pattern day and day. It rises with the sun, sets with the sun. So those are the three key themes that have really driven the change of our energy costs and the composition of our energy costs here in Ontario. So now we're really going to look at some of the themes that we think are going to be driving the future. So if we look forward and say, okay, what's going to happen in 2015 to 2020? What is that going to mean to our energy costs, and what's going to be driving? What are the main trends that are going to be driving those changes in our energy costs? So the first change, and it's not really a change, it's more of a continuation, is carbon. So COP is going on this week. It's a huge event. The whole world is going to be moving to reducing carbon. And with a carbon cap and trade system in Ontario, that's going to have a big impact on us, all of us, as energy consumers. The next thing that's going to have a big impact on energy consumers, and every energy consumer eventually, is mandatory reporting and benchmarking. It's one of the most effective tools for conservation out there, and the governments are mandating this through regulations and through laws that everyone's going to have to be doing this reporting and benchmarking. And obviously costs are going to continue to go up. We're continuing to invest in new energy sources. We're continuing to invest in conservation. And all of those costs have to be paid by ratepayers. And so we're going to see those costs going up. So the first thing I'd like to talk about on these themes driving the future is carbon restrictions. And people always ask us about the U.S. carbon plan and what the U.S. is doing about off coal. So Obama's Clean Power Plan is really contributing to a massive reduction in coal-fired generation in the U.S., the same way that we had a massive reduction in coal-fired generation here in Ontario. And you can see the states here that are in the dark blue are the ones that are having the biggest reduction. And now the really important part here is just to say that everything that Ontario has gone through for the past 5 years, since 2009, we're going to see happening in the U.S. in a very short manner. So this, there's a common theme going through the industry right now of lots of industry trying to leave Canada and going to cheaper U.S. markets. Well, it's not really going to be cheaper for very much longer because they're going to start eliminating coal, which is the cheapest form of power. And just like us, they're going to be replacing it with wind and solar and nuclear and a bunch of other low-emission sources. And again, this is not something just happening in North America. So here's a global perspective on it. And this data includes China, it includes India, and everyone's thinking, oh, China and India, they're just going to build all sorts of coal plants, and they're just going to, increase the emissions in the environment. Well, you can see from 2015 on, the amount of coal and hydrocarbons generally that China and India and the whole world generally is using is going to be decreasing. And it's actually going to be offset by increases in renewable generation. So the same thing that we've seen happen in Ontario is eliminating highly emitting sources of energy and replacing them with low emitting sources of energy is exactly what's going to be happening in every jurisdiction across the world. In Ontario, what are we doing? Well, we're going to introduce a cap and trade system, and I'm going to try and make this the quickest cap and trade primary you've ever seen to keep it at a really high level. So everyone in Ontario, or actually it's going to start with the large emitters, so the big emitters in the province of Ontario, are going to have a cap that's going to be assigned to them for electricity their electricity consumption, which is going to turn into emissions. So if you consume a lot of energy, you're going to have to be concerned about what your GHG emission cap is going to be, because then you're going to be set that cap, and if you emit above that cap, you're going to have to buy allowances from the open market, and if you emit below that cap, you're going to be able to sell those allowances into the emissions market. So it means if you're efficient and you can use your energy in an efficient way, then you have an opportunity to make some additional money off of those cap and trade credits. And then if you're not and you're consuming too much energy, then you're going to have to go into the market and buy emission credits. So mandatory reporting. So everyone's always asking us about mandatory reporting because it means that it's going to be more work for all of us and more work for energy consumers. So what does the mandatory reporting really look like? So we're going to see mandatory energy and water reporting. And in 2016, if you have a building that's more than 250,000 square feet, and this is aggregate 250,000 square feet across a portfolio, you'll have to start reporting in 2016 for your 2015 results. And you can see that from the slide, the threshold is going to go down every year, and it's going to continue to go down and get ratcheted down. And no one's certain how far the reporting thresholds are going to go. But you're going to see that they're going to continue to go lower, and the intent here is to get almost every major energy consumer in the province to be captured under the mandatory reporting. The reason for this is mandatory reporting and benchmarking has proven to be one of the most effective techniques to help customers reduce their energy consumption, because you don't know your performance unless you have a good benchmark to compare it against, and this gives you the transparency that you need in order to pursue conservation opportunities. So then from a carbon reporting perspective, you can see here, this is information that's produced by the Ministry of the Environment. And we're always really interested in this to see what's out there. And so this is how much emissions are produced by the top 10 emitters in the province of Ontario. So you can see there's some names here that you're not surprised to see. Dofasco and Hamilton, obviously they're one of the huge emitters. They're the single largest electricity consumer in the province of Ontario. That makes sense. There's some steel plants there. There's some generating stations there, because generating stations obviously burn a lot of natural gas. So phase one of this carbon reporting and carbon trading system that's going to start in January of 2017 is going to affect these companies the most. But just like the mandatory reporting, it's going to continue to get ratcheted down and affect smaller and smaller companies throughout the province. Here is a really good example of mandatory reporting and benchmarking. So this is from New York City. New York City was one of the first jurisdictions in North America to mandate the mandatory reporting and benchmarking, and now almost 80% of all the buildings in Manhattan report into this system. And in 2 or 3 short years, they've seen a 10% reduction across the entire city of energy consumption. So it's a perfect example of why the province is mandating this mandatory reporting, because it actually drives some really significant benefits from a conservation perspective, a consumption perspective, and then there's all sorts of the intangible benefits that go with that, from less emissions and lower costs. And then from a carbon cap and trade perspective, this is a really interesting prototype here that we're working with one of our large manufacturing clients. People are always asking us, our clients are always asking us, what are you doing about carbon cap and trade? What can we possibly do about carbon cap and trade? So here's an example that we're working on, like I said, with one of our large manufacturing clients. And you can see this is showing a year-on-year difference of their carbon emissions. So looking at 2014 versus 2013, their carbon emissions that are allocated to their company has fallen by 30%, which is a phenomenal result, and especially since this is a global company, a global manufacturer, and they have to report these results to their global head office. So it's a good success story for this client. And it's also a really good success story for this client, because when carbon cap and trade comes in 2017 or 2018, this is actually going to lower their costs and going to derive some actual real financial benefit for them. So that's the where we see costs going in the next 5 years. So really, the summary of the next 5 years is going to look a lot like the previous 5 years. So costs are going to continue to go up. They're going to continue to be driven by more fixed costs and less variable costs, so a high fixed cost component. Carbon restrictions are going to intensify, especially if there's an international accord that's reached this week in COP. That's going to trickle down to us in Ontario from a carbon cap and trade perspective. And then mandatory reporting is obviously going to become a big thing for all of us that work in the energy industry. We're going to have to do a bit more work and try and find a way to hit these mandatory reporting requirements. So now it comes to the part where I think everyone here is really interested in. It's really what recommendations can we make to you in order to help you manage your energy costs and reduce your energy costs and reduce your energy consumption. So there's a number of tools that we have in our toolbox. So from a cost perspective, reducing your energy costs, there's really two things you can do. You can manage your consumption, and that lowers how much you're consuming and thus how much you're paying. And you can manage your variable costs, and you can do that by smart purchasing and procurement strategies. And those are really the two strategies you can implement in order to reduce your energy costs. So we really like to take a crawl, walk, run, fly approach, because you really need to get the basics in place before you can start doing some really advanced analytics. And so we're going to walk through this. This is really a process that you can take back to your desks and to your office, and a process that you can implement in your business that's going to help you identify some of those conservation opportunities and get you ready for some of those mandatory reporting requirements that are coming very quickly in the future. So the first thing you need to do is you need to acquire and store all the information from your electricity invoices. So not just the key hitters that everyone stores, like the electricity consumption information and the cost. You need to get every single line item off the bill. Because only with that every single line item are you going to have the right information that you need in order to do the benchmarking and the comparisons that you need to do, and to get the accurate information for the mandatory reporting. There's going to be a lot of stuff on that bill that if you're recording it already, you're going to need to make it for mandatory reporting. The next thing you want to do is you want to make sure that what you're paying is correct. So we've all seen the newspaper reports about Hydro One and the Ombudsman report. There's been a lot of billing issues in the province of Ontario, and our own experience has found that there's a 1 to 3% error rate. So you could be paying 1 to 3% too much on your energy bills for no value, right? You're just being charged extra. And so you want to make sure that that information that you're getting, that data, that cost that you're getting is actually correct. And so there's no errors in that bill. So you want to make sure that you're checking every line item on that bill to make sure that it's correct and that you are paying what you should be paying. Now the next most important tactic is establishing an internal benchmark for comparison. So you can group your facilities together into like facilities and compare them against each other, and you can compare different groups of facilities against different groups. And what that's going to allow you to do is going to allow you to identify some best practices. So the ones that are consuming less energy than the average, you can look at those and do a walkthrough or an audit of yourself and figure out what are they doing that's allowing them to reduce their consumption? What are they doing that makes them the best in class? What are they doing that means that they're consuming less energy for the same amount of square feet? That's going to allow you to take those best practices and apply it to your entire portfolio and really identify those opportunities to save. And that's where huge benefits are going to come. Companies have implemented these baseline comparisons and benchmark comparisons generally see 10% consumption reductions. So those are huge benefits just from getting into some interesting database comparisons that you can do on your own. And then finally, once you've collected all that information, you've got it into a database, you've ensured it's correct, and it's really important to ensure it's correct because, as we all know, garbage in, garbage out. So if you put some bad data on the spreadsheet and you go and try and make some comparisons with it, you'll make bad comparisons. So once you have that information set, start doing some really simple database comparisons. So there's things like nighttime audits, closure audits, which is checking how much energy you're consuming when the building's closed. And I'm going to show you a quick example here that one of my colleagues did for one of our clients. So this is a picture of our software tool, the Bruce Power Saver. And you can see this client's consumption. They've got a 5-day profile, right? They've got 5 humps there. And that's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And they close over the weekends. And you can see that over the weekends, it drops down to a pretty low level. But what we noticed, and this is just from a simple observation and working with this client, is that on the Monday where that arrow is, they were consuming more on that Monday when their facility was closed than they were on the weekend when the facility was closed. So that makes us question, well, why is that? If you're closed, you should be closed, right? You shouldn't have any differences between that. And so we worked with this client and we kind of estimated what this was going to cost or what this is costing them. And so this is costing about $50,000 per year. And that's just by this simple analysis, we were just able to look at this and go, hey, this is worth $50,000 per year. Is it worth you going into your facility and doing some walk-arounds and some checks on Monday night after your facility closes to figure out what's going on? So the client is still going through this analysis to try and figure out what is actually causing that. But when we identified this for them, they kind of said, well, that's really interesting. That's not the way it should be. We're closed. It should be the same as the weekend. So they're trying to correct that, and then in a couple months' time, we'll be able to see that coming through the data, and then we'll be able to go back and see whether they're actually going to realize that $50,000 of cost avoidance. So we talked about the toolbox, and so we've talked about the simple process you can implement in your business in order to manage your consumption to reduce your costs. And there's some opportunities that you can execute to manage your variable costs. And those come down to smart procurement strategies and really purchasing energy in a smart way. And the first thing you can do is if you have a number of small facilities, there's an opportunity for you to aggregate them and pay less per kilowatt hour, so less cents per kilowatt hour, by purchasing energy in a bulk way from someone like Bruce Power. So we all pay the time of use rates at home, so we pay roughly 15 cents a kilowatt hour. And if you have a number of these small facilities like bank branches or gas stations or small retail facilities, they can save anywhere from 2 to 3 cents per kilowatt hour on their energy bills, and by purchasing bulk energy from Bruce Power or the like, and we can help you do that. The next thing is if you have some very large facilities, so for people who have managed these sorts of facilities, they're the Class A facilities. If you don't know what Class A, then it probably doesn't apply to you, but if you are Class A, then you have an opportunity that you can purchase some fixed price for electricity to eliminate any volatility or variability in your electricity expenses. And then finally, the last way you can save some money on the variable cost is verifying the cost you pay are correct. So I talked about earlier, the Ontario Ombudsman says there's up to a 5% error rate on energy bills, which means you could be paying 5% too much. So you get those checked, and then you can recover that 5%. So it's a small bit, but every little bit helps in a world when energy costs are going up by 8% per year. So it sounds like you've got a lot to do. So there's carbon cap and trade, there's mandatory reporting. So one of our key messages here is we are here to help. And so I'm going to walk through some simple examples of how we can help. So I gave you the process that you should implement in terms of get your data, store your data, check your data, benchmark your data, and start doing some of those database comparisons. So we can help you do a lot of that process. We've automated a lot of that process, and we can help you manage that in a really efficient way. And we do that through a software program that we developed called the Bruce Power Saver. And the Bruce Power Saver helps our clients save money, and we help them save money in a couple of ways. One is directly on their energy expenses, and the other is through the time and effort that their teams and their employees have to take in order to acquire the data and manage the data and make sure it's all correct. So we've automated that entire process, so we can help you save money on your energy bills, and we can help you save money in some of your overhead. And obviously, the whole point of this Power Saver program is to help clients reduce their energy consumption, because that's what it's all about. That's the best tool to reduce your energy costs. And then coincidence with that is we're helping our clients manage and report on their carbon emissions, because that's going to become a very important thing as we get into a carbon cap and trade system in 2017. So you've seen this crawl, walk, run, fly analogy before. At Bruce Power, we love this crawl, walk, run, fly analogy, because you really got to get the basics in place before you can start doing some really sophisticated stuff. Everyone always comes to us and says, hey, I want to put in real-time metering. I want to like sub-meter every piece of equipment in my facility. I want to put real-time monitors on my HVAC units. I want to do this. I want to do that. And we start asking them about how much they spend on electricity, how much they spend per month, how much does it vary, and they don't have answers to those simple questions. So our first thing is you really need to start by getting the basics in place first. And so how do we help get the basics in place? Well, we give all our clients consumption transparency with the Bruce Power Saver. So we get your hourly consumption information from your utilities. We bring it into the Power Saver. We make sure it's clean and accurate and correct. And then we help you automate a lot of those functions that we talked about earlier in terms of benchmarks and baselines and comparisons. So we rank every single facility you have in the province or in the country by energy consumption. We'll normalize it by square footage, and we'll weather normalize it. So that way you can compare apples to apples. And when you're comparing a facility in Thunder Bay with a facility in Windsor or Welland, where they have much different weather environments, you don't have to worry about that. We've taken care of all the nuts and bolts of the math in the background. And you can look at those two facilities and say, that one uses 20 kilowatt hours, and the other one uses 25. So why is it using that much more energy? The next thing we do is we require all of your utility invoices, and we automatically scan and extract every single line item on the utility invoice, and we reverse engineer all of the calculations on the utility invoice. So we found errors as high as $175,000 for one of our large manufacturing clients, and for a small bank branch, we found an error that was, I think, $20.11. So not that the bank branch, I think the bill for the bank branch was only like $5,000 for that month. It's not like they're going to go back to Toronto Hydro and say, you owe us $20. It's kind of immaterial for all of them, but just demonstrates the accuracy of the analysis that we're doing, that we can identify that billing error of $20. So if we're going to find $20, we're going to find any billing error that's actually there. So you can rest assured that the information that you're using for your analysis is correct and accurate. And then this is where everyone always gets excited about this, when we get into real-time monitoring and control. And this is the whiz-bang stuff and the Internet of Things stuff that's really popular right now that we're working on. We have some clients that we're developing some prototypes around this with, and I'm going to show you a few screenshots of the prototypes that we have. And this is, we're hardware agnostic, so if you have metering equipment or you have a building automation system, we can pull all the metering points from those pieces of equipment, those systems, and bring them into the Power Saver and allow you to rank, benchmark, and prioritize with those metering systems the same way you would with your billing data. So that way, once you've got the baselines down from your billing data, you can start getting into your building and start digging down into further and further granularity to really identify where those conservation opportunities exist. And then finally, once you've done that, you've reached kind of the holy grail of what the energy market is and where the energy market's going, and that's all about that active demand side management. So that's reducing your consumption in real time or near real time, and shaving your peaks and doing all of that kind of active management. And that's where you're really going to get into the opportunity to pursue 20 or 30% or more energy consumption reductions and really save some money, because not only you're going to reduce your consumption, you're also going to have the opportunity to reduce the highest price periods of the day and self-manage your demand charges, which make up 20% of your total energy bill. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the real-time monitoring and control, because this is the really interesting stuff that people always want to know about. People are like, hey, there's all sorts of this great information out there, all this great metering technology where we can meter individual pieces of equipment. How do we go about doing this? Well, we say this is getting inside the walls of your building. So when you're dealing with your utility data and you're looking at that utility data, that's at the building level. But where you really need to get into is to get inside your building. So we say you're breaking down the barriers to your analysis. You're breaking down the barriers of actually getting at the consuming pieces of equipment. And so what you can do is you can identify and monitor these individual pieces of equipment. So in this example here, you can see there's 3 pieces of equipment and 2 HVAC units and 1 whole building monitor. So we can aggregate all that information for you, combine it with your consumption information or your cost information that's coming from your bills, and really give you the opportunity to target some of those really key enhancements. So here's what real-time information would look like in the Power Saver. And the reason why I show you this is you can see on your left-hand side, those are all the metering points that this client has installed. This is a big box store here in, actually I think it's in Markham. And you see they have 150 metering points in this single big box store. And what we've clicked on here is the one rooftop unit, the part that's highlighted in blue there on the far left. So this is the actual real-time consumption information that's coming from this rooftop unit. And now no one's going to sit here except for a board engineer and watch this real-time information get updated. But the real value of real-time consumption information is the ability to set thresholds and alerts and alarms. So we're metering, I'm showing the information here from one rooftop unit, and this building has 12 rooftop units. It's a fairly large building. So we're going to be able to say, set an alarm if this one rooftop unit is greater than the average, and then if there's that one rooftop unit is consuming greater than the average, that's an opportunity for an engineer to get involved and look at figuring out why, because on a real-time basis, they should all be relatively the same. And then again, breaking down those barriers of consumption. So really know where your energy goes. So it's one thing to have your energy bill and say, hey, I'm spending $1,000 a month or $5,000 a month on energy. But with this advanced metering technology, you can see exactly where it goes. So again, this big box store, you can see that every month, and actually we're looking at 140 days roughly here, so it's from July to November, they spent 30% of their energy consumption on lighting, and they spent another 20% of their energy consumption on the HVAC. So you can look at that and you can really start to figure out, where do I want to invest my time and money in reducing my energy consumption? For this place, they have 30% of their total energy consumption is used in lighting, so they certainly want to be investing in some more efficient lighting. And the next thing they want to be looking at is their HVAC package. You know, they're investing 20% of their total cost in the HVAC, so that's a huge opportunity for them to gain some benefits from their energy consumption. And again, just like ranking, so here's a picture of a ranking. So we've taken these 150 different metering points that they have in their building, and we ranked them all according to consumption. This happens with a couple clicks of a button, so it's really simple. So you think 150 data points, that's a lot of data points. How am I ever going to manage that? Well, the system's going to manage that for you, and you can see that they've got 150 data points there, and you can't see them all because the screen goes further. But again, you can see which ones are consuming the most and where you should be spending your time and trying to identify those conservation opportunities. And obviously it's going to be those ones at the top, which ironically enough is 3 fridges. So this big box store has got these 3 fridges that are consuming inordinate amounts of energy. So that's where we really think the energy market's going. We've talked about, you know, getting the consumption transparency, getting all that information from your bills, automatically scanning it all, making sure it's correct, getting into the real-time metering, real-time sub-metering of those really high-consuming pieces of equipment, and then ultimately getting to the world where you're going to be able to participate in the demand side of the market and getting into that peak shaving and demand-side management. So those are the tools that we have for you today, and there's really the 2 big buckets of tools, and that is managing your consumption to reduce your overall costs, and then the opportunities to manage your variable costs if they apply to you. So with that, I think I have run through my presentation in relatively quick time, and I'd like to open it for questions if anyone has any questions.